Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Leah Gage, and I am one of the community grants managers here at Humanities DC. Today, we are presenting our Community Culture and Heritage Grant Workshop. We're going to talk in depth about this particular grant program, which is now open. The grant application due date for this opportunity is February 18th by 6 p.m. So you have some time, and we'll go through the application. We also have a current grantee in this grant program joining us, Jeronique Bartley, and she will be sharing a little bit about her work as well toward the middle of this presentation. So at this point, I want to welcome you and let you know that this is being recorded, and we will be sharing out this presentation to any of you who've registered. So if you would like to reference this in the future, you can view that recording. It will also go up on our YouTube and our website, and that will become available. We will also share out the slides. If you'd like to have captions throughout this presentation, you should be able to find a 3-dot or ellipses button that says more, and that should allow you to add captions to the presentation. Also, if you have questions throughout, please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. However, we will pause for questions throughout. So feel free to add a question as you need, but we will also offer opportunities for questions. And you can use the chat feature there, and Hillary or I will try to get your question answered as soon as possible. So without further ado, let's continue. So today we're going to give you a brief intro to Humanities DC in case you aren't already familiar with our organization. We will also then talk about the Community Culture and Heritage Grant Program, as well as the requirements, the purpose of this grant program. You'll hear from Jeronique, one of our current grantees. We will ask for you to give your own brief intros if you'd like. You can share about your idea or the work that you're doing, and we'll try to keep those to about 30 seconds each. And then we'll go in depth into the application and the questions. We'll talk about the weighted review criteria, which is what our grant reviewers use to score applications. And then we'll talk about the application review process as well, and what that looks like, how long that takes, and tell you a little bit more about applicant resources. And then there will be an open Q&A. So we'll try to be about an hour and a half here today. And as I said, this is being recorded. So if you need to leave at any point, you should be able to access the recording in the future. So as I said, my name is Leah Gage, and I'm one of the community grants managers at Humanities DC. I am one of the main points of contact for applicant resources, but in particular, I'm the main point of contact for the Community Culture and Heritage Grant Program. So if you have specific questions about this program, you can always reach me. However, you can reach my colleagues as well, and I will ask Hillary to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hillary Steen, and I'm the other Community Grants Manager. I am an additional point of contact for questions, and I'm the main point of contact for reviewers in the review process, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. Thank you all for being here today.
Hi, everyone.
Boy,
Lori
if you
Lamar,
could,
Director of Grant Making and Programs. Great to see you all.
Great. Thank you. And then we also have Jasper Collier. He is the Senior Manager of the DC Oral History Collaborative and is involved in those grant programs. And together we make up the community grants team here at Humanities DC. And so now, actually, I'd like to invite you all to introduce yourselves if you wish. Take maybe 30 seconds to state your name, why you're here, if you have an organization that you're with, and tell us a bit about your proposed project.
Good morning. I'm Marvin Tupper Jones of the Chowan Discovery Group. Our mission is to research, document, preserve, and present histories. Our project for this grant period is to digitize a selection of 45,000 negatives made of Howard University during 1977 to 1976. This selection of this digital archive will be is to be donated to Howard University and the DC History Center, and public talks will be given as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Marvin.
Hey everybody, I can go next. My name is Jose Dominguez, and I am here representing Next DC. And we're an organization that works with teens in the high schools in Washington, D.C., who are interested in careers in hospitality and tourism. And our project is going to be about capturing the hospitality story of Washingtonians who have been working in the field for years, as well as current Washingtonians, to be able to archive this and keep this as a history for other students coming up through our high school program, as well as just the general public.
Very cool. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wayusi Baraka. I'm representing a group of people that used to run a open mic on U Street between about 1995 and 2010. And as you know, the landscape of U Street is changing, and our goal is to create a digital archive of a lot of the works that we were doing. So it's just not forgotten and lost in the sauce.
Indeed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Chestnut, and I am here representing myself for this particular grant interest. I'm a lifetime resident of Far Northeast Ward 7, and years ago we created the the Cultural Heritage, Greater Deanwood Cultural Heritage um, uh, walking tour. I'm interested in establishing those walking tours for this area and community, including the communities of River Terrace, Parkside, Kenilworth, and Deanwood, and put those into brochures where we can conduct the walking tours and inform the community of the historical heritage and cultural heritage of this area.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh,
No, go ahead, please. Please.
thank you. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marjorie Bryant. I'm here as an independent, and I'm interested in exploring the environmental, social, and cultural elements that impact sustainability practices in DC. And so I'm hoping to do that through storytelling. Thank you.
All right. My name is Lafayette Barnes. I am the publisher of the Washington Informer Bridge, which is a subsidiary of the Washington Informer newspaper. We mostly cover, culture and entertainment stories. My goal here is to start something called the DMV Fashion Infrastructure Story Lab, which is a humanities initiative that expands the historical, cultural, and economic foundations of DC's fashion ecosystem. We plan to document, the history of designers, manufacturers, retailers, and neighborhoods across the district. It will look like public-facing humanities programs, including 6 to 8 public programs, and will be put into film screenings, and a way to basically document DC's fashion infrastructure.
Very cool. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Camden Arciniega. I'm a historian in DC. I run a tour company called DC by Foot, and I am going to be working with Keegan Theater, hopefully, on an kind of exploration of the history of local DC history theater. Noting we just lost the Source Theater, and Keegan is celebrating their 30th anniversary coming up. So we're going to be working on a publication and an event at their theater this year.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chifundo Eguatu. I work in a collective called Post-Rave Feminism. We look at like nightlife and rave culture as a location for feeling free, especially under unfree political conditions. So our project is to like practice rave methodology and document what we find through a podcast specifically for and by DC liberation workers. Thank you for having this happen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle Banks, and I would like to put together a series of public programs that would focus on the work of a former colleague and mentor, Olivia Caraval, who joined the Ancestors this past spring, in addition to some programming at her home, which was very much a center of cultural and historical life in Mount Pleasant. We've also would like to be able to do something with her archive. So it would be, so in addition to sort of drawing things from the archive, that we would use to sort of build a series of public programs.
Thank you. I think we probably have time for two more folks.
I could jump in.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Eric Goldstein. I'm a former teacher in DC public schools, and for 20 years I've been working with the nonprofit One World Education. I'm really interested in this opportunity. I recently published my debut novel, Taught, about teaching and learning in our city during the pandemic and social justice unrest. And I'm interested in this opportunity to build a curriculum so the book could be used and leveraged in classrooms across the city. Thank you.
Hi, I think I'm last. I'm Ann Oldenburg. I'm in the journalism program at Georgetown University, and we are working on a collaboration with the 51st, a new startup journalism outlet. And we have a couple of ideas, but nothing formed fully. So you all are way ahead of me. So I probably won't be competing with you this time around, but just want to understand the process. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you all so much. Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry. I joined just a minute ago. Sorry, my call ran late. But Adrian Garcia, I go by AGG. I'm based in Columbia Heights, and I have two organizations. One is Tintas DC. We're a Latina writers group, and the DMV. We have over 150 writers in our group. We meet monthly at Mount Pleasant Library and do like writing workshops and shows and just feedback circles. And then also I have a queer Latina book club called Los Bookies, also at Mount Pleasant Library. That's also a podcast. So those are the two projects that I'm working on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing. If you didn't get a chance to share, please feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat. But we really appreciate you all being here. And I think it's a really useful way to kind of kick us off to hear the different ideas kicking around. So thank you so much. But now let's tell you a little bit more about Humanities DC and who we are.
Yeah, so Humanities DC has been around for over 40 years at this point. There are humanities councils all over the country, and we are DC's Humanities Council. And we connect curious people with bold questions to the powerful stories of our vibrant city. And we do that through two elements. One is grant making and one is public programs. So briefly, we have several curated public programs that happen throughout the whole year. One of them is our community journalism program, which is a training program for local journalists and hopeful journalists, all about print journalism and best practices around journalism. We have our monthly culture series, which is a monthly event that highlights different humanists around the city. In February, the next one that we have is going to be about comedy that's east of the river and different comedy venues that actually don't exist really east of the river. In March, we're going to screen several short documentary films from American University students. And in April, our culture series will be about scandals in DC. We also have the DC Oral History Collaborative, which is a partnership with the DC Public Library, all about collecting and archiving oral history interviews. And we also have fellowships. So I highly recommend that if you haven't joined us for these programs previously, that you find out more, and hopefully you can join us at a at an upcoming Culture Series event. So that is one part of the organization. The other part is community grants, as you all know. So in 2026, we hope to give about $900,000 to 50 to 60 grantees across 8 wards. And we have 6 grant opportunities in 2026. 3 are open right now, including community culture and heritage, and 3 will be open later in the spring. And so what are the humanities? It is a pretty, it can be a pretty vague definition. So just wanted to briefly cover what it actually means. So the humanities help us navigate the complexities of our past, present, and future. We think of them as a compass for interpreting what humans make and exploring what makes us human, which I realize is still pretty general. So sometimes it's helpful to look at it through specific disciplines that the humanities cover. So the humanities help us understand our stories past. So through history, anthropology, and archaeology, for example, they help us understand our stories' expressions through literature, linguistics, language, arts history, things like that. And they also help us understand our stories' values through ethics, philosophy, comparative religion, and law. So with all of your introductions, it seems that all of them do touch upon at least one of these disciplines, looking at different elements of the humanities. So again, it's a pretty vague definition, but it also covers so many wonderful things about human society as well.
And so the Community Culture and Heritage Grant Program is intended to capture some of these elements of the humanities through public expressions. And so the goal of this grant program is to expand the humanities beyond academia and formal scholarship and empower residents and community organizations to give public voice to stories that interest and represent them. So what, this is kind of what we're trying to do with this slide and with these descriptions is kind of break down what that would look like, what humanities looks like in the, through this grant program and through the kinds of projects that this grant program funds. It could be highlighting untold stories or forgotten aspects. I heard a lot of you talking about things, making sure you wanted to document stories that maybe haven't been documented before, or highlighting communities that may not have their stories told as frequently as others. I've heard many talking about written publications, curriculum, multimedia. All of these are really great ways to use this grant and to kind of expand the humanities, as we say, beyond academia, really putting it in a public realm. The other thing that I want to mention is that this grant program has a community showcase tied to it. So all of the grantees who receive this grant are invited to then take part in a community showcase that happens each spring. This spring, we're excited to host it on April 9th. It's going to be at the Arc, and all 13 of our current Community Culture and Heritage grantees will be there to talk about their projects, to give brief presentations. And this is something that this grant program specifically includes because of the kind of grassroots nature of the program. So a couple of grantees that we currently have, I think maybe one of you might be here, Tracy, but so we have the couple grant examples of grant programs that we funded this year. Salon Redux, this was a project taken on by Tracy Childs McGee to create a concrete toolkit to host, to help community members host their own salons in the spirit of Georgia Douglas Johnson, who had her own S Street salon in the early 20th century. And so this project was grassroots in that it really kind of focused on this one story of this one salon, but then it really gave residents, community members across DC and beyond the tools to take it into their own homes, create their own salons, and spur more discussion. Another project that we funded this past year was District of Pupusas. This is a short film that is being produced by Valeria Cersante, who's a local filmmaker who is trying to document immigrant food culture in DC. And she's doing that by interviewing a few specific immigrant business owners in the Mount Pleasant and Columbia Heights area. talking about their stories and highlighting that, but to kind of draw a greater connection. So those are a couple of examples. And now I want to turn to our grantee, Jeronique, who I believe is on the line, who's going to give us a little bit about her own experience in this grant program. Jeronique was a grantee through the Community Culture and Heritage program last year, as well as this year, and has a project called the Great 8 Fashion Tour. She also got to take part in our Community Culture and Heritage Showcase last year. So I'm hoping that she can give us some insights into this program from her perspective.
So first, let me just start by saying thank you for the confidence boost right now with the picture on the screen. It just, lifted my spirits this morning. But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeronique Bartley. I am a multidisciplinary artist and a documentary film creator. I have a huge passion, just like the rest of you, for storytelling. And I think that one of the best ways that we communicate stories is through our clothing, what we wear, the way we show up. It's one of the first ways we communicate with people without even opening our mouths. And in DC, that story is told so differently across each of the areas in the city. If you go to Georgetown, people are expressing themselves totally different from the way people are expressing themselves in Congress Heights or in Ward 4 or in Ward 3. And I was looking at these different ways of storytelling and I said, oh my goodness, this is unique. One, because this is one city and DC it's not a big city. It's a small city in a lot of ways, big in a lot of other ways. But for a city to have so many different languages through the things that we wear, it was very unique to me. And I said, how do we tell this story? And how do we capture it in a way where we're not just saying, look at what this person is wearing. They have on a green top today. How can we be different from the way fashion is expressed currently and already? And one of the things was finding the stories behind what people are wearing. I bet a lot of you don't know that over in Southeast DC, we have one of the most important figures in the history of fashion completely, not just for DC fashion, but in the history of fashion. She was one of the first Black seamstress who worked in Hollywood. And she worked on shows like 227. She worked on Good Times. She worked on any of the shows that had people of color during her time in Hollywood. She was there. She also, and I said this before, but I'll say it again. I'm not going to say it was a white suit that got the first Black senator elected in Maryland, but I will say that her popularity grew after she wore that suit that was made in Southeast DC in a little community center. And a lot of people, they don't know those intricate details until we find ways to tell them. And we find ways to tell them in a way that people want to hear. And so I saw these stories and I said, let me be a vessel. I want to be the one to help tell them. And as I was going about, there was a community member already who is a Humanities DC grantee. And he said to me, well, do you know that they have these grant programs available? And I said, what? He said, yes, they have these grant programs that will help support you in telling these stories to the community. And I saw the grant program, I applied, and my email, when the email came, I said, look at God. Oh my goodness, this is a blessing, because not only do I get to tell these stories with my camera using photography, videography, but I also get to upgrade the experience for other people. Through Humanities DC, they have allowed me to create a website. It's currently still the newer website, the newer version is still in production, but when it's released, you guys are going to be, I feel like you'll be excited about what it presents. My favorite part of the website that is coming out is there's a map. So you have this grade 8 fashion tour and there's a map. And so you see these cultural stories, you get to see them, you get to go on the map and you see the history of this outfit, who made it, why it is culturally relevant in DC. And I think right now, at a time when DC is currently, all eyes are on DC. And because all the eyes are on DC, we might as well look good as they watch us. And so receiving the grant has allowed me to expand the work way beyond what I initially imagined. I initially just imagined creating this little 5-minute video, and it just was like, bloop, 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 look at DC. But because of Humanities DC, I have definitely been able to expand that and expand the audience. There was a young man in DC. So if you see this picture of me wearing the colorful garment on the screen right now, the young man who made that had never before put on a fashion presentation. Leah talked about it earlier, but there's a community workshop that goes on. I invited him out to come and to come to the community workshop with Humanities DC. He came out. The reception to his work, the feedback that he received, and that honest, authentic level of community support that he received by being in the space in the room, and the opportunity that Humanities DC created, along with a lot of pushing from my end, allowed him to put on his first ever theatrical production. And so he put on a show in Southeast DC at the Arc Theater to a sold out audience. And I would love to say that a large part of that came from me being supported by Humanities DC, him feeling supported in the process, and the whole process all around. So that is my spew, my sport. I don't know how long I've been talking, but if any of you have an interest in following along, sharing this journey, we have a YouTube that we work on most, and then the website is astylecapital.com/join the gallery. And right now we're just visually appealing, but the social emotional part is on the updated site. And so we look forward to getting those stories out. We look forward to, if you are capable and able to support it. I see Jose has the jerseys in the background, so I know you're a fan of clothing. Eric, that sweater you're wearing right now, love it. I'm sure you picked it out with a purpose. Lafayette, I know you have a lot of stories that you said you want to tell about fashion and culture in the community. And so this is also a way that Humanities DC supports artists, because we get to be in spaces where people really do support the work in authentic and genuine ways. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to stare at this picture that they put up of me because it looks good.
Yeah. Yes, and it was, yes, and it's true. This beautiful garment. Yeah, it was such a, this was at the showcase and it was such a great presentation. Thank you so much, Jeronique. Thank you for sharing your journey and for talking about your project. And I think you really inspired a lot of folks. Some folks have asked if you can drop the link that you mentioned into the chat. I think it would be great if we could, I can find it as soon as I'm done sharing my screen. But then I think folks can also follow along and ask you some questions along the way if they have any. Great. Well, so I want to continue on and tell you a little bit more about this grant program. And then if you have specific questions for Jeronique toward the end, we can open that up. But for right now, I want to tell you some key grant details about the Community Culture and Heritage Grant. This is a $10,000 grant, and it is open for a project period beginning May 1st, 2026 through April 30th, 2027. This grant is open to DC-based individuals, community groups, as well as nonprofit organizations. If an informal community group wishes to apply, it doesn't have 501c3 status, that's okay. You would just need to identify one individual to serve as the main grantee. Individuals may choose to apply through a fiscal sponsor if you wish. That is not a requirement for this grant. Individuals can apply for and receive this grant without a fiscal sponsor. But if you choose to do that, the fiscal sponsor just would need to meet the same eligibility requirements, being DC-based, registered in DC as a 501c3. I will tell you that this is a relatively competitive grant. Last year, it was among our most competitive. And we anticipate that this year it will be competitive as well. We funded about 19% of eligible applications last year, and we will have 10 awards available in 2026. Oops, sorry.
So this particular grant requires 2 reports, and this goes for all Humanities DC grant opportunities. So one is the interim report, an interim report call, which would be due in October of 2026. And during this report call, you would talk with Leah about how the project is going so far, basically. You would break down the funds that have been spent so far, any progress, any challenges, things like that. And then the final report is due on May 30th of 2027, which is about a month after project activities should have ended by. And for the final report, this is when you explain the funds that have been spent throughout the entire project period. It's also where you provide documentation of all expenditures, so receipts, invoices, timesheets, things like that. And it's also where you would provide the project evaluation. And the final report, again, is due about a month after the end of the project period to allow you all to reflect on how the project went and gives a little bit of extra time to collect all those receipts as well. Like Leah mentioned earlier, another requirement for CCH grantees is that you would participate in the community showcase. This showcase, again, like Leah mentioned earlier, is really just to highlight CCH grantees and all of the wonderful work that you've been able to do for several months. And more information about all of these requirements will be provided at a new grantee meeting that would take place at the beginning of the project period if you're chosen to be a grantee.
And so this grant is, as a project grant, a program grant, all funds must be applied to the program that you are proposing. So that could include salary and wages, as long as they are related to the team members carrying out this project, stipends and honoraria for participants, as well as consulting fees related to the project. If you were to purchase recording equipment or anything like that, that could be an eligible expense. Visual presenting platforms or space rental, so be that virtual or brick and mortar space, supplies and project equipment, anything related to the project, really. As well, if you did have a fiscal sponsor, you could apply up to 10% of the award as an administrative fee toward the fiscal sponsor if that were required. What this project grant cannot fund any non-program related costs. So that could just be general operation expenses of your organization, things like rent, things like utilities, that would not be eligible unless you can somehow tie it specifically to the program, the project that you're carrying out, maybe the event. Certain things are needed for that event, but generally those sorts of operating costs are not eligible. General office supplies, as well, unfortunately, we are not able to fund food and beverage with this grant. So if you're hosting an event and you want to include food and beverage, those expenses are eligible to be part of the project. They just can't be covered by our grant. This grant cannot cover tuition or scholarships, any kind of re-granting, debt reduction, or funding to any government agencies, local or foreign.
So there are various components of really what would make a successful application. And by successful in this case, this means that the external community grant reviewers deem that your particular application really hits on all of the questions that we're asking. And we'll go into more detail about each application question and what's the weighted criteria, but just some general ideas of what may make your application successful and would get funded. So one element is that there is a humanities focus. So some of you might have already seen the application questions in our grants portal or on the website. And one element, one very key element, is that each project has to utilize the humanities to publicly explore human stories, culture, and experiences. Then other components really are focused on having a detailed application. That is the biggest piece of advice that we give to potential applicants, to be as detailed as possible in your application. The community grant reviewers review your application based off of what you write. They don't do outside research, so there might be various elements of your project, of your organization, that you might think are really obvious, but at the end of the day, if someone who's not part of your work is trying to understand what you're actually trying to do, if you're not detailed, if you don't really define acronyms, then they might not really understand what you're saying. So we ask that you be, again, as detailed as possible. So that might be based off of your project narrative, the timeline, having clear dates and clear steps. If you're working with any community partners, you identify them and you say how they will actually work with you on the project. You identify all team members and what they're actually going to do for the project. And any outreach plan identifies targets, public outreach, perhaps you're seeking public input, things like that. So again, everything, just try to be as detailed as possible, and that's the best way to be a successful applicant. And then on the opposite side, if you do not provide enough detail, then that is the biggest application issue that reviewers have told us about. So perhaps you don't identify all key personnel, maybe you don't say what they're actually going to do for the project, perhaps the timeline misses key steps or goes beyond the scope of the grant period, maybe other responses, there's just not enough specific elements to it, and perhaps the budget just doesn't really explain what is happening, basically. So again, we will go into each application question shortly, but perhaps in the budget narrative, you just say that you're going to do something with $500, but you don't explain what that's actually going towards. So that would be another example of something that's just not specific enough. And that is something that reviewers pick up on.
Great. So I am going to pause here to see if there are any questions while I go into the application. So I wanted to highlight a couple of questions that were asked in the chat. One question was, are there templates for the final and interim reports that are required? And yes, all of that is done in our online application system, which I'm going to show you right now. And then another question was whether media, like digital ads, media, things like that, are eligible expenses. And yes, typically they are. Like if you're doing Instagram ads or things like that to promote your event or promote your film, whatever it may be, those are typically eligible expenses. Okay.
I have a question. Is it possible?
Please go ahead, Lafayette. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So my question was, in the application, right, in the budget, right? Let's say the project is, this is a $10,000 grant. The project cost is $15,000. You're able to, get the extra 5,000 like donated or something like that. Like, how does that affect the first? If the grant is good, right, it's good. But now you're comparing like the great grants, and so some may cost more, some may have more support, some may have a engagement plan. So are those factors included when you're comparing the winners?
That's a great question. We will talk about the weighted review criteria, but one thing we tell reviewers to do or not to do is to compare proposals to one another, but to really compare the proposal to the review criteria and to consider each proposal. In particular, if there's funding that's already existing for certain grantees or things like that, we really ask that applicant or that reviewers not consider that. We'll show you when they're looking at the budget, one of the things they're really just looking for is, are these things allowable? Are there any unallowable expenses? Have they thought it through? Does the budget reflect what they've explained in their timeline, et cetera? So yeah, I'm happy to show you the review criteria and we can talk about what they'll be thinking about and how to best shape your application. I want to also highlight another question that came through the chat. Can you explain specific requirements for a written publication? So a written publication, that's a broad description. For this grant, it probably wouldn't look like a book because the idea is that your project would be done by the end of the project period. But maybe it's a brochure that kind of takes you on a walking tour through a particular neighborhood. Basically, the requirements for the written publication are the same as any project. It needs to be focused on DC. It needs to be thematically connected to DC. It needs to be connected to the humanities, some kind of humanities discipline. And as we'll talk about the review criteria, it'll need to meet certain other criteria as well. AGG, I see your hand is raised, so I'll go ahead and acknowledge you.
Oh, thank you so much, Leah. I'm sorry, I'm eating lunch right now.
No problem.
No, so I had a question. So like kind of going to Lafayette's point, like what if the budget is like a $20,000 budget? Like it's more than just like the 10,000, but some of those line items are like food or like other stuff. Should we kind of scan through it so that way it's like specific to this grant, or can we? Because like sometimes I like to include everything so people can see the giant snapshot of not just yeah, just the holistic like project versus just what the funds that are being applied for through this grant.
Yeah, great question. And we would ask that you include the full project budget if you can. I'll show you in the template in the application. There's a column that says, how will you use the Humanities DC grant? And then if you have any additional funding, how will that be used? How will that be applied toward the total? It's not a requirement. We don't ask the grant, there's not a matching requirement. However, if you do have additional funds, it's good to include it because it can show if you have like a really expansive project and $10,000 may not take you there. If you have additional funds that will to help take you there, that can help reviewers see why it's a worthwhile project to support.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to now turn to the application itself. Okay, so hopefully you all can see the grant interface. So when you go to, this is our website. I'll take you first to the Humanities DC website. And when you go to community grants and grant opportunities, this is the best place to find everything related to community grants. And the grant portal login is right here, the top resource for applicants. There are also instructions listed here for how to go about creating an account if you don't already have one. If you do already have an account, meaning you've already applied in the past to any grant opportunity, you don't need to create a new account, and we strongly encourage you not to. You can use your existing account. If you have trouble logging in, if you can't get in, let us know, reach out to us directly, and we can usually help you get into the system. But once you log in, this is what you'll see. This is my account, and you can see these are the open grants that are currently available. Community Culture and Heritage is the one we're talking about today. We have 2 others open now. And then our grant reviewer application. If you'd like to be a community grant reviewer, you can apply using this system as well. So I already had a draft saved, and so that's why I got that message that said, do you want to continue an existing draft? If you want to, so here, I'll just show you that again. I can click view request, and that's just the request that I've been working on. So you can always save your application and come back to it. You don't need to just complete it all in one go. We talk about the review process up here, and we'll go into that in more detail, so I won't address it right now. But the first thing you'll be asked to respond to is what kind of applicant. Are you an individual or are you an organization? If you're applying as an organization, that means you're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you don't have that distinction, you should apply as an individual. Applicants must be DC based. So you must have DC residency, and we would ask you to prove that. If you're an organization, then you must be registered in DC. So we'd ask you for your location, how you learned about the grant opportunity. And then there's a question here that's optional about any previous Humanities DC grant experience. This question is not reviewed by reviewers and does not impact the score of your application at all. It's mostly just our own data gathering to help us understand how people are moving through our grant system and if people are coming back, if they've been applicants in the past or if they're brand new, as well as what their experience was like. So if you're applying as an organization, we ask that you include your mission statement, a brief history of the organization, and how this project might support the organization's mission and goals. This is essentially the organization's personal statement. This is why we're applying for this grant, who we are, and what this grant is going to do for us. This here, foreign entity registration, this comes up more frequently than sometimes because so many organizations may have been incorporated outside of DC, maybe in Maryland, maybe in Virginia, but are then registered in DC. So if you're a nonprofit that was incorporated outside of DC, you need to have been registered in DC as a nonprofit to receive this grant. And there is a documentation for that called a foreign entity registration. If you're not familiar, let me know. We can talk about it offline, but that's where you would include that documentation here. If you don't include it here, we will come back and ask you for it at the eligibility stage. We ask you to include your organization's annual budget, the number of full-time employees. If you're a really small organization and you have a $0 budget and you have no employees, that's okay. This is not going to be judged. You will not be judged based on this information. It's to help us understand how to assign applications to different panels so that large organizations are compared with large organizations, and et cetera. We try to do that just for fairness on panels, even though we do tell our reviewers not to compare applications to one another. If you're applying with a fiscal sponsor, just indicate that here. That will open up another section, but that's not a requirement for this grant. And if you have any questions about the fiscal sponsorship, just let us know offline. But if you're not applying with a fiscal sponsor, then you would select no. For those of you who would be applying as individuals, I'll just show you how that will look slightly differently. These questions are the same. We still ask you about previous experience, but instead you would just include an individual statement of interest. What motivated you to pursue this project and apply for this grant? And then we ask you to include proof of age and DC residency. Individual applicants must be 18 or older and be DC residents, and that can be proved with a driver's license or some other alternative proof of residency. This is also not reviewed by our reviewers. This is only reviewed by staff just to ensure eligibility. So once you've responded to those questions, then you're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the project. And up here at the top, we include in every section the weighted review criteria. So this is what reviewers are going to be considering as they're moving through the application. So this section is worth 25% of the total score, and they're looking to see the applicants provided clear and detailed description of the project and its activities, a timeline that includes a completed public-facing project within the grant period that is feasible. There's a clear connection to the humanities, and achievable goals or impacts are described. And the applicant has a clear plan for assessing project success. So here you're going to name your project. You're going to include the amount that you're requesting, up to $10,000. Applicants should request as much as they need. So you're not going to be scored higher if you request less than $10,000. So if your budget's for 10K, then you should include that full amount. Humanities discipline, this is slightly different from last year. If you're reapplying, you can select multiple humanities disciplines if you feel that they apply. We, in the past, had only requested that you select one. If you're not sure which humanities discipline best applies, you can reach out to us. Project type, similarly, just include however many you think best apply, but really only include the ones that you feel best apply to your project. If none of these apply and you end up just selecting other, you can describe what that is here. Then we ask you to provide a very brief 3-sentence project summary. And we do this both for our own purposes as well as to just introduce the reviewers to your project. Our community grant reviewers are individual volunteers who may have some familiar with humanities in DC, particularly whatever topic they're looking at in your grant, in their grant review, but they may not know your organization. They may not have any familiarity with your topic. So this is an opportunity to just sort of introduce it. So this is like 3 sentences to kind of introduce the project, get reviewers ready to understand what they're going to be reviewing. And then here in the next question, your description of activities, this is where you can really go into great detail. And you would describe each element of the project, as well as the steps that you would, describing what goes into getting to that place. Going into detail, and the more details, the better. The timeline should then kind of match this description of activities. And the timeline should sort of help tell the story of what the steps you're going to be taking throughout the grant period, what those steps will look like to get to this description of activities above. And something I tell applicants is that your application kind of tells a story, and each piece should match. So if you're talking about certain people doing certain things in your description of activities, hopefully those people show up down in the questions about who is in your team. If you're talking about making sure you're planning an event, hopefully the steps that go into planning that event will appear in your timeline in detail. So being as detailed as possible is really key, especially in this timeline section. If you have an external timeline, like something like an Excel doc or something, you can upload that here, but it's not required. I'll also just remind you that the grant period is May 1st, 2026 through April 30th, 2027. So the timeline can extend beyond that. It doesn't need to be within there, but the funds need to be spent within that time period. So you couldn't include any receipts or expenses that happened before May 1st, and it couldn't extend beyond April 30th, 2027. The connection to the humanities. This is an important question. Oops, sorry about that. And I ask you to really look in detail at these bullet points. So the connection to the humanities, how is this a humanities project? And why is this connected to the disciplines that you selected earlier in the application? So we have several bulleted questions below to help you kind of think through that. Because as Hillary was talking about earlier, sometimes the definition of what humanities is complicated and it's hard to describe. So this is here to help you. So how do these disciplines, like the framework of history, if that's your selected discipline, how does that help you explore and navigate what you're talking about? I guess in this case, how does, why did you choose history? Why did you choose anthropology? What about your project speaks to those disciplines? Describing that here. How will this project enable you to make connections? What stories is this project telling? These are the sorts of things that you can respond to in this connection to humanities question. And then lastly in this section is the measuring success piece. So this is how you describe what you hope this project will achieve and how will you know that? And so there's a couple ways to think about this. It can be very specific, concrete things like, I know I want to reach 100 people and I want 100 people to say that they attended and 98% of them to say that they really liked the event. And so if that's what your goal is, that's something that's actionable, that's something you can point to. How will you know that? But then two, you'll need to describe, how do you know that that is an impact? What impact does that give you? So if you can talk a little bit more about maybe some of the softer impacts, I want to increase understanding about this project, I want to increase awareness, then talk a little bit about how you'll know that you're doing that. Is there a survey? Can you just sort of ask people at the event? Can you gather informal feedback? Can you gather formal feedback with a form? I think reviewers really look at this section and they want to see some kind of specific ways that applicants are assessing their impact. So that is that section. That's the 25% of the total score, and that's just sort of talking about describing the project. Then the next section is the connection to DC. This is also worth 25%, but there's really only one question. And so this is where you're going to talk about the connection to Washington, DC, or some kind of specific community within DC. There's a thematic connection. If it's not just sort of DC broadly, maybe you're talking about a specific community, that's okay too. A particular family, a particular story, individual, all of those things are okay, but you need to make that connection back to DC and explain why this project has significance to the DC community. This is an opportunity for you to make your case, and you can speak to other project or other things that you've talked about in your project description or timeline. You can also refer to some of the people that you're going to be working with and their influence. But that's how you would respond to this section. So I'm going to take a moment and pause and see if we have any questions. Looking through the chat, I don't see anybody have any questions coming up, or should I just keep going?
Oh, I have a question.
Please.
So let's say, for instance, you have a specific person in history, in DC history, that you wanted to talk about or emphasize. So I'm trying to make sure that are you talking about the whole entire district that we should gear our project, that everybody in the district is going to benefit from this project, or or can we narrow it down?
Absolutely narrow it down. Yes, you can absolutely narrow it down. And so what we're asking in this question is, there's a strong thematic connection to DC broadly, or specific DC-based communities, neighborhoods, or stories. And that could be an individual. And then really, it's important to then to describe why highlighting this individual story is key. If they haven't been highlighted in the past, why that's, why you're choosing this story now. If there's some connection that you want to draw more broadly, but this is kind of where you're talking about the significance of this story and why it's like you're making the case for the urgency of doing this project now in this question, and specifically as it relates to DC. Is that helpful? Does that help answer? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Would that information be in the connection to DC section or in your project description? Like under your impact?
Well, so that's a great point. Yeah, I think what you're going to be in this question, you're going to be answering what's your goal and how will you know that you've achieved that goal. This is where you're talking specifically, you're making the case of why this is connected to DC and specifically why capturing this story is necessary to archive in DC right now, or why we need to be documenting this DC story, or why this DC culture is essential to be documented. That's kind of, it could be related. You could end up kind of connecting these two, but they're asking different things. Thank you, yeah. Okay, I'll keep going, but please feel free to jump in here. So public engagement is the third section, and that's also worth 25% of the total score. So the goal here is, this is where you're going to be talking about how this project is reaching the public. This is not intended to be a research project where it's just sort of, you're going to be information gathering or ideating. The goal is that there's some kind of public presentation, publication, something by the end of the project period. So there's a clear and effective plan for the project to reach and engage the project's target audience, and that the project will be inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible, defined broadly to include financial, geographic, demographic, cultural, and developmental accessibility. And if a project is geared for a more particular demographic rather than the general public, that's clearly explained. So here you can respond to your target audience demographic information. If you're trying to reach the general population, you can select that there, or you can specify if you're trying to reach a particular age group. But if you are, you might want to be prepared to, you should be prepared to describe that, why you're making that distinction. Race and ethnicity is the same thing. If there's a particular community that you're targeting or that you want to include, you would indicate that there, but you could also just select the general population. And then wards, again, if you're targeting a particular ward or wards, if the story takes place in particular wards, you want to really just sort of highlight something like that, then that's totally okay, but indicate that there. You can also just select them all if it's more general. So then you're going to describe what you're doing with your public engagement. So first is your outreach strategy. Describe your plan for reaching and engaging the project's target audience. So this is where things like someone asked about digital media ads. This is where you would highlight that. You would talk about, we have this plan to do this, and we know we're going to work with X person who's going to help us create Instagram ads or go live or whatever it is. This is where you can be that specific in your planning. If you're planning to partner with others to support your outreach, if you have a consultant that you're planning to hire, if you have an intern, something like that, any of those things should be noted here. Yeah, if you know, one thing I'll always say is if you say, we're planning on working with community partners, that sentence is not nearly as strong as we'll be working with this organization, this community, civic association. You know, as specific as you can be, I think always is stronger than being broad and general in your descriptors in this case. So then the second piece, after you've talked about how you're going to do your outreach, is talk about who and why you're reaching these folks. So your inclusion and accessibility plans. If you're hoping to reach a general audience, how will you, and you have a $20 ticket fee, how are you going to ensure that you can reach people who maybe can't afford that? Why did you choose certain locations? When you think back to who it is you're targeting up here, talk about why it is you chose certain locations, why they're more accessible perhaps to those populations, or if you're targeting a specific population, why that's key, why that makes sense given the topic area or the storyline that you're highlighting in your project. So that is the public engagement section. Next into DC, public engagement. Okay, and then we're going into who is part of your project. This is worth 15% of the total score. The project director is capable of directing the project as demonstrated by experience and how their role is defined. The humanities scholar has relevant qualifications for the proposed project, and their role is clearly defined and lends legitimacy or intellectual authority to the project. And if other team members or collaborators are identified, then the reasoning for their involvement is explained and where they're going to be. So let's break that down. First is the project director. Several projects may have multiple people who could be considered the project director, but in this case, we ask you to identify one key project director. This could be the applicant. If your project is kind of a one-woman show, then maybe it's just one person, and that is the project director who's also the applicant. But if you're identifying someone on your team, you would include them here and their information. If they're not the primary point of contact, you would want to note that and include below here who might be the primary point of contact. So we ask you to include this information and then a descriptor. Why the proposed project director is well equipped to manage this project. You can describe prior work. You can include a resume if you wish, but it's not required. Any other kind of documentation or project examples you want to include to demonstrate why this person's the right project director can go in here. I will say that in the past, reviewers have really liked seeing examples. They like seeing a resume or a bio if that's possible.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Are points taken off if your project director is not in DC?
Great question. No, the project director does not need to be based in DC. We know that plenty of DC stories exist outside of the DC border. For our own requirements, we require that the grantee be DC based. If the project director is based in Maryland or Virginia, perhaps, then you could describe why they're still the best person to be the project director. If it's less clear, if your project director is based somewhere completely different, then you would probably want to address that here. It's really just about making sure that this person's the right person to direct this DC-based public humanities project.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then as far as team and collaborators go, it's the same thing. If you can be specific here, we really strongly encourage it. Identifying which roles, if you're going to have, if above in the project you've talked about, we're going to make sure we're placing these ads and that we're going to be doing an interview on this podcast or something like that, then where are those people, making sure that the team and collaborators matches what you've described above. If you've mentioned particular collaborations that you hope to have with a particular school or a particular organization, ideally those folks would be mentioned down here. The humanities scholar. So this is a key piece to this grant program. The humanities scholar is somebody who contributes their expertise in humanities content and methods around whatever goes into the particular project that you've identified and lends legitimacy and helps guide this project. And the scholar does not need to have formal academic training or any kind of professional experience in the humanities, but should have lived experience or some kind of experience that's demonstrated through their bio or through any materials that have been provided to show why this person's the right person to help direct your project and keep it rooted in those humanities disciplines. If your project is focused on cultural preservation and a particular culture that's rooted in DC, then that person could just be a culture bearer in that community. And then you would want to talk about why that person's the best person to help ensure your project stays in the lane of that discipline. One of the things I often, a comparison I use when I'm helping people understand the difference between humanities and the arts is that humanities projects are usually offering some form of interpretation. They're telling the audience kind of what they're hoping for you to learn, whereas arts are typically a little bit more open to interpretation. And oftentimes the humanities scholar is a good person to help ensure that you're staying rooted in that humanities discipline. So that's a little bit about the humanities scholar. Feel free to ask your questions if you aren't sure who to pick or who the right person is. The humanities scholar could be the project director as well. You would just want to describe what the difference is between their roles in that project and why they're the best person to fill both those roles, because they are different roles. So here you would describe their qualifications and how your humanities scholar will lend authority to the project at various stages. They don't need to be involved at every stage. They could just be kind of at the outset. They could be helping you think about evaluation toward the end. That's really up to you. And then the last section is the budget. This is worth 10%. And here reviewers are considering if the applicant clearly described how the funds will be used and that all expenses are directly tied to the project's proposed activities. So again, they'll be thinking back and looking back at the description of activities above and seeing, okay, are all of those reflected here in the budget? If they talked about hosting an event, are those event expenses listed here? And if not, where are they? Is there some explanation for that? And then the second thing is just that the budgeted expenses are allowable. So you'll think back to that bulleted list that we provided earlier of what's allowable, what's not. And we also list it here just to be extra careful so that you know what's allowable. And then here's that budget table that we described. So here, this is where you would want to enter all of your grant funds that would come from the Humanities DC grant. So if you're requesting $10,000, it should total $10,000 here. Basically, however much you're requesting should match this number right here. So honoraria, that could be for participants. Salary and wages, again, related, as long as it's related to the project, we do welcome salary and wages expenses. Any travel, that could be getting from point A to point B for some of your participants. Sometimes there's other travel required. Any supplies, publicity and promotion, things like that, you would just sort of enter it down here, but then the budget narrative is where you would describe what that number reflects. If you have 500 in honoraria, you should describe what does that mean? Who is that for? And what piece of your project, as described above, does that reflect? So again, being extremely detailed in your budget narrative, giving reviewers all of the information that they need so that they have a complete picture and can say, yep, this all makes sense. These numbers match what has been described above. Numbers can change, and budgets are plans. They are flexible, and it is very common for a grantee to be awarded a grant and then need to change their budget moving down the road. So you may save money somewhere, you may get some in-kind things like that. We always welcome that. So just know that moving as you move through the application process, that these numbers can change and you won't be held specifically to each number.
And two other quick things, Leah, if I may, about the budget.
Yes, please.
Just remember that in every single budget category, so honoraria, salary, travel, things like that, there has to be a dollar amount. It could be zero. If you don't plan to spend any funds on travel, just put zero. There just has to be something in every single box to make sure that the application can actually be submitted appropriately. And then for the budget narrative piece as well, I want to also emphasize what Leah mentioned earlier, how like budgets are plans. So in the budget table and the budget narrative, just go off of the best information that you have when you actually submit your application. It could be a best guess if you would like, but just whatever information you have, you can put that. In the budget narrative, you can also put calculations if you would like, but lump sums are also totally fine. Either way, you just have to explain and describe what the dollar amount is.
Thanks, Hillary. So that's the last kind of big piece of the application. Here is an appendix, and this is where you can include supporting documents. Now, if you have supporting documents, I encourage you to include them. So what could those be? If you've mentioned community collaborators above, you've mentioned we want to partner with this organization, if you can get a letter of support from them and include it, that will definitely strengthen your application. I can say last year reviewers really loved to see that. And I think it shows, A, that you as an applicant have been doing your homework, you've been spending time, and the project is in motion, and there's community buy-in. There's buy-in from people who you've already kind of identified to be part of it. And that will help reviewers see this has real potential to be a very successful project. So if you can include those sorts of things, it's always great. You can include site agreements if you have things like that, any other planning documents, letters of recommendation, or just sort of sample documents if you have a flyer, if it's a particular event, things like that. All of those can go here. All that said, this is optional, and you're not required to enter this information. And if you don't have supporting documents because it doesn't make sense, there's no need to create additional documents just to include them.
And we do recommend with supporting documents, if you're providing like a whole packet of information as a supporting document, try to keep it under like 20 pages or so, just because the reviewers, we ask them to really read through the entire application, including the whole appendix. So kind of just keep that in mind, that if you submit a supporting document that's 200 pages long, or a movie that's 2 hours long, they might not be able to really absorb all of that information. So we definitely, if you do have supporting documents, definitely feel free to upload those, but try to keep it semi-limited.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as like uploading videos, things like that, it usually doesn't work. So if you have links, that's always best. You can drop links into this section here, and there's 10,000 characters, so you should have plenty of space. Then at that stage, we ask you to certify your application. So by entering your name below, we ask you to electronically sign this application. You may, if you're an organization, you may enter a title, but the person signing on behalf of the organization should be authorized to sign. If you're an individual, then you should just sign yourself. And at that point, then you would submit. You can always save and come back. You can click Save Application and come back to it. And it will tell you if you didn't enter key required information, because you'll need to come back. And you won't be able to submit if you haven't responded to all of the questions that are required, and that's indicated with an asterisk. And so, yeah, that's the application. I will go back to some slides, and I know we are almost at time. But before we close, I want to talk a little bit about the application review process.
Yeah, so now, let's say you submitted your application. What actually happens after that happens? So all submitted applications are reviewed by Leah and I for something called eligibility. So this is when we see if we can theoretically fund your project. So for example, if you apply as an organization, this is where we check your 501c3 registration status. All submitted applications that are eligible are then assigned to panels or groups of reviewers. And Leah mentioned this earlier, that we try to assign applications to reviewers that are similar to one another. So in years past, we have broken down the applications by organizational budget size, by project output, by humanities discipline, things like that. So all of these external reviewers will be able to review similar applications, basically. And we've talked about the reviewers a few times throughout the presentation, so now a little more detail about them. So we have an external review process at Humanities DC, And these reviewers are community members who have strong ties to the humanities in DC. And they score each eligible application based off of the weighted review criteria. That weighted review criteria is in the application, it's in the RFP. We put it everywhere basically to make sure that both applicants and reviewers know how to score an application. And this whole review process takes roughly a month or so. Reviewers are given roughly 2-ish weeks to do all their scores. Then we do an additional review as staff members on likely grantees. The reviewers all talk together about their opinions about what they think for each application they reviewed. So it's a pretty extensive process that takes place in a pretty short amount of time. And if you, in particular, are interested in reviewing applications, you are more than welcome to. Applicants can also be reviewers. You just wouldn't review applications in the same grant program that you applied to. So if you want to apply for CCH, but you also want to be a reviewer, then maybe you would be a reviewer for one of the other grant programs we have. And we have applicants, grantees, and future applicants who have been reviewers. Reviewers get a lot out of the process. They learn about really cool projects and organizations all over the city. They have a really strong idea about what makes a strong application because they're the ones to actually review applications based off of that criteria. It's a great networking opportunity to meet other humanists all over DC. It's a great professional development opportunity as well. So they get a lot out of the experience. And all reviewers who are able to complete a cycle of reviews can receive an honorarium of $125 as a thank you for all of the hard work they put into this review process. After that whole review process happens, we send the Humanities DC board a slate or a list of the likely grantees, as well as a memo outlining the whole review process that we partook as an organization. The Humanities DC board does not choose the grantees, and us on staff do not choose the grantees. It's really these external reviewers who do that. Funding decisions are sent out roughly 10 weeks after the application deadline. So we pride ourselves that we're able to move through this whole process quickly and thoroughly. But 10 weeks-ish after February 18th, all eligible applicants will know if they receive funding or not. And if you become a new grantee, then you could receive your funds roughly 2 weeks after you're notified if you get funding, which I know in the nonprofit sector is really fast. But we know that all applicants are really excited to get started, so we try to move quickly through this whole process too.
Okay, so as you're working on your application, know that there is a lot of assistance available to you. In addition to this workshop, which was recorded, we have our FAQ, we have sample application responses by popular demand this year, and you can find those on our website. We have a couple upcoming information sessions. Tomorrow night, Hillary and I will be at Dorothy Height Public Library. And then we are also hosting another virtual information session on January 20th. If you're interested in the oral history interviewing grant, which is a grant that supports the collection of oral history interviews and documents and archives them at the DC Public Library, there is a workshop this Wednesday at 12. And then we have our Visions Grant. We have our Visions Grant program. That is a $25,000 grant open to nonprofit organizations to support events and projects. That grant workshop is Friday at noon. And all the upcoming sessions will be there. And when Cycle 2 opens, we'll host more workshops. Our Cycle 2 grants will open March 3rd. And we have 2 minutes. So are there any questions, anything that we can help answer? I'm happy to stay on the line a little longer if folks need.
Just real quick, this is Samaya Lane.
Yes.
I'm really interested in the visions projects and events. So will we get a link for that um, virtual meeting?
Sure. Yeah. Here, let me, oops. Yeah, let me send that out to you. Um, I will find it and send it.
I can put it in the chat, Leah.
That would be great. Thank you.
Leah,
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. In terms of the budget, let's say that we're looking at producing a short documentary film. I know that part of the grant application includes, how are you going to get this out to the public? What event do you have? What if the grant doesn't cover, everything in terms of all the promotion that the organization is going to be doing for the film screening event? Um, do you have to include that as part of your budget, I'm assuming? Can that be an in-kind budget? So you would say it would actually cost us this much, but we're providing it in kind in terms of promotion and publicity about the film screening event? Or are you expecting
Yeah.
it's going to be funded by cash only?
No, I think, yeah, you can definitely include in kind. And I would just, if you have like, let's say publicity and promotion, that line item, you would just enter it in that second column. You could write, an amount, you could put, whatever you think it is, estimate how much you think it's worth and describe below that would be in kind.
Okay, but in terms of the grant proposal itself, it's you would say that it's required that you have a public event related to a documentary film that is being funded through this grant. It can't just be that the grant is for a documentary film production. It has to include a public event associated with it to get it out to the public. Is that correct?
The film would need to be available to the public by the end of the grant period. So if that means it's, you've published like whatever the digital website web version of it and are promoting it, it doesn't need to be an event specifically.
Okay, so it could be on YouTube or on Vimeo, and that's where people can watch it, that type of thing. Okay.
And then you'd want to talk about how you're making sure, you're ensuring people will see it.
Right. Okay.
Can I also answer that? I've won 3 DC Humanities grants to produce short documentaries, and I put them on YouTube, but I also had public events at the library, at the libraries, and at other areas in DC.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marvin.
You're welcome.
I see a question here from Lucy. Can one apply to multiple grants in the same year? Yes. In this cycle right now, you can apply to 2 opportunities at once. You could apply to the Community Culture and Heritage Grant as well as our Oral History Interviewing Grant, or you could apply to Visions and the Oral History Interviewing Grant. You cannot apply to both Community Culture and Heritage and Visions. So if you were to apply to any of those grants this cycle and receive one of them, then next cycle, you would not be eligible to apply for any other program grants or project grants. Applicants may only receive one project grant per year. However, if you are an eligible nonprofit that's open to apply to our general operating support grant, that's considered a non-project grant, and then you would be eligible to apply for that as well. So I hope that's helpful. I know that that's a little bit confusing. I'm happy to explain
that again. You can apply for the vision and the oral history.
So basically, this cycle, oral history, if you apply to oral history, then you can apply to one of the other 2 opportunities. We've opened that up to kind of encourage more people to apply to our oral history program, frankly. But so the Community Culture and Heritage Grant and the Visions Grant are not those. You cannot apply to both of those at once. You need to choose one. And then next cycle, we'll be opening 2 additional program grants, 2 oral history grants. So if you receive a grant this current cycle, then you would not be eligible to apply to either of those. If you did not, then you could apply to those.
Can you give us an idea at all in terms of the documentary films that have been funded through the Community Heritage grants, how long they've been? I mean, I'm envisioning a 15-minute documentary, which I think you can pack a lot of information into, but that would that be looked upon as, oh, that's not long enough? Or, have most of them, have you had shorts, 10 or 15 minutes long, or have they been longer than that?
Yeah, for this grant program, I think a short is appropriate. I'm thinking of one film that was produced that was a half hour, but even that was, I think, long. It could be shorter than that.
Okay.
And I
Yeah,
can
go ahead,
answer that.
Marvin. Yeah.
Let's see, 2 of my first 2 were about 10 minutes long. My third was 32 minutes long.
Yeah. And I asked that because in film festivals, 30 minutes is considered a short documentary. But I mean, that's kind of long. I've produced a lot of documentaries and most of them have been 30 minutes, and that includes a lot of information. And I think like in 15 minutes, you can include a lot of information too. So I was just wanted to see if that was something typical. And I think Marvin kind of confirmed that, and you, Leah, had also indicated that that would be looked upon as, yes, that's reasonable length. So.
And if any of you are interested in doing like a feature length documentary film or a longer one, then we do recommend you look instead at the Visions grant, because that provides up to $25,000. So, a little bit different from CCH in that case.
Okay, well, as we are now 5 minutes over our time, I'm gonna ask if there are any last questions before we close. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I want to remind you that we have lots of grant resources available. My email is there, but then here's kind of the link to everything that we have available. This session will be sent out as soon as we get it ready. So hopefully by the end of this week, we'll get it out to you by email. But please reach out to us if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, and huge thank you to Jeronique for joining us and for offering her insights.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you.